You're right.
Have you heard about that body though? That they took the body to the soldier and made him a tool escape and then just completely burned off their dress? That was the thing. I cannot remember the name of him right now.
I'll look into it.
No, but I can help you find
We'll pass it along so I can add it in there. All right. Are you guys ready to rock? We got lesson 10 here. We're looking at the war in the Pacific from 42 to 43. All right. So we've got U.S. Marines in what? What are they sitting in? Yeah, they're sitting in the landing craft. Very good. So we're going to be talking about advanced landing craft that is going to be used in the Pacific. And in fact, there's a number of different, please do, a number of different landing craft that are going to really be, it's a big technological advancement for victory in the Pacific. So the first thing we're going to look at is the Aleutian Campaign in Alaska. This is considered the forgotten battle. It's fought from June 3rd, 1942 through August 15th, 1943. A really small Japanese force occupied the islands of Attu and Kiska in the Aleutians. The islands were remote, and obviously the terrain and the weather created some pretty serious problems. This meant that it took nearly a year for a large U.S. force to get them to remove them at Dutch Harbor. Infantry fighting, air battles, some naval battles connected to the Aleutian Campaign. The island's strategic value really controlled the northern Pacific Great Circle routes, and this goes back to the importance of airfields off these islands. The Japanese and the Americans want to maintain control for air superiority. Japanese reasoned that control for the Aleutians would prevent a possible U.S. attack across the northern Pacific. Similarly, the United States feared that the islands would be used as bases for launching aerial assaults against the West Coast. Airfields are of vital importance on both sides. And there are a couple of raids, aerial raids on the Pacific Northwest off the coast of Oregon and Northern California. Again, the battle is known as the Forgotten Battle due to being overshadowed by Guadalcanal, which was happening simultaneously. Here we have landing craft in the Aleutians on the top left. Over on the right, you can see aerial bombing that has taken place. Look at the terrain in the background. This is hard mountain fighting, frigid temperatures. And then, if you guys wouldn't mind taking a look at the map here, we have Attu, we have Kiska. This is the area in which the fighting for the Aleutian Campaign took place. The Aleutians combined U.S. Army, Navy, fighting in this campaign. So let's talk a little bit about the American offensive, the island hopping, aka the leapfrogging offensive. Americans want to use island hopping or leapfrogging to gain control of islands that opened up their supply lanes, as Jackson pointed out. Great job. And to bring them closer to Japan than ever before. Remember, this is the collaborative work between Admiral Chester Nimitz, who's in charge of the Pacific for the Navy, the entire Pacific Fleet, and Douglas MacArthur, who's in charge of the United States Army in the Pacific. Remember, MacArthur's working out of Australia at the time. Most U.S. Army personnel are located in Australia and in New Zealand during this period of time. Most of the Navy and the Marine Corps are working off the coast of California Hawaii, and other U.S.-controlled and Allied-controlled islands. Hence, the island hopping campaign. We're also going to develop 2 floating fortresses, number 38 and number 58. Have you ever heard about our floating fortresses? Pretty nuts. The first time the Japanese laid eyes on the floating fortress 58, it's called Task Force 58, they knew that it was the beginning of the end. They weren't going to be able to reproduce carriers and destroyers, cruisers, and battleships at the level that we were, because we're just cranking them out by 43 and then into 44. And we'll take a look. We're going to talk about 58, Task Force 58, in this lesson, and then when we get into 44, we're going to start looking at their numbers, like the statistics on what their numbers look like. Again, the Pacific Ocean was just too large for the Navy to go it alone. The U.S. needed to take land to get closer. So there's some important players in the game. Clearly Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, he's got to keep MacArthur's ego in check the best he can. In fact, it's pretty impressive Marshall had to deal with the egos that he did have to deal with. It's more than just MacArthur and Patton, a number of other people. You keep in mind Patton's in Europe, MacArthur's in the Pacific, and Patton is under the command of Eisenhower at this period of time. And then you have Nimitz, and do you remember the other naval commander? Tremendously important medical school graduate from the University of Virginia. Admiral Bull Halsey. In fact, that's the ROTC building at UVA is named for him. So, is the relationship between MacArthur and Nimitz perfect? Absolutely not. But they're willing to collaboratively work together. Again, this plan is going to get the United States within striking distance of Japan. It's going to allow the United States to set up air bases, or set up bases of operation and airfields. And the goal is to be able to not only conquer those islands, but to retake what? Groups of islands. What do we want to get back? Where? Philippines, very good. What else do we want to get back?
I'm sorry. Sorry.
You took my answer.
It was his. I
All right.
full credit.
So the Philippines, very good. Obviously, that's MacArthur's axe to grind. Where's some other islands we want to get back?
Guam.
Guam, very good. Wake, we want to get Wake back. Very good. So these are islands that we've lost and we want to regain control of. And obviously, the Allies want to get their land holdings back as well. So Guadalcanal, fought from August 7th, 1942 to February 9th, 1943. This is a long, drawn-out campaign. This is really the first time that American forces begin to wrap their head around how difficult it's going to be to take islands in the Pacific from the Japanese, who are following through the Bushido Code and are willing to follow through with that death before dishonor type of mantra or mentality. Mantra or mentality. So the code name of this particular campaign is Operation Watchtower. It's fought on and around the island of Guadalcanal and in the Solomons. It's a vital shipping lane for the Allies to Australia. And it was launched after the Australian, it's launched after the Australian Kokoda Track campaign in Papua New Guinea that was controlled by the Australians. This again is an attempt by the Japanese to capture Port Moresby. Remember, Port Moresby would give the Japanese a clear opportunity to launch an attack on Australia. Why is the Kokoda Track of Papua New Guinea also important? This is like hardcore mountainous terrain fighting in Papua New Guinea, and the majority of those this is like the Kokoda Track to Australia is like our Guadalcanal. Even though the casualties weren't that high, why is this important to Australia? Yes, and it's a form of protection for Australia. The Kokoda Tract is an Australian colonial landholder. They control that. They don't want to give it up. Correct. Yeah. So they want to maintain control of that. That for, again, defense. So Guadalcanal is going to be the second major offensive after the Kokoda Tract. On August 7, 1942, Allied forces, predominantly the United States 1st Marine Division, landed on the islands of Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and Florida, not the U.S. state, obviously, in the southern Solomon Islands, with the objective of taking the islands from Japan. This group of islands, again, are going to be heavily defended by the Japanese. The Allies intended to use Guadalcanal and Tulagi as bases to support a campaign that would eventually capture and neutralize the major Japanese base at Rabaul on New Britain. And again, Robin, good job with that on the driving question. So, if we take a look at the map, we have a better idea of where the Solomons are, where Guadalcanal is, and you can see that shipping lane here, shipping lanes here. We want to control all of this. Allied control of all of this is still intact, thanks to the Kokoda Tract campaign. And the goal is to be able to hop closer and closer. But look, the island hopping campaign, if you look at it into the Solomons, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, the Carolines, look at these sets of islands. It's going to be very difficult, hard fighting all the way into the summer of 1945. Again, the island of Guadalcanal and Florida Island, very dense, swampy, nasty jungle. Big problem with insects, big problem with malaria, big problem with jungle rot. Are you familiar with jungle rot? This is when your feet get infected. Trench foot. Yeah.
It's like that minute in Forrest Gump where he's like, it's always change your socks.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a big part of this. Because if the guys can't march, they can't stand up, they can't fight. So, and where are you gonna take your guys? We're gonna have to take them probably back out to sea and ship them where?
Not there.
Australia or New Zealand to be able to have them recover. So this is a big problem. Again, the snakes, the scorpions. The disease and the elements were a big challenge for the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal. So the Allies overwhelmed the outnumbered Japanese defenders who occupied the island since May of 1942. But as you might imagine, by that period of time, the Japanese had had plenty of time to dig in and set up defensive positions. The goal here is the strategic airfield, later named Henderson Field, and a really important person is a Virginian, the key leadership from Lieutenant Colonel Chesty Puller during this campaign. Anybody ever heard of Chesty Puller before? He's from Deltaville, Virginia, right down on the toward the peninsula. Chesty Puller, yeah. His first. Look it up. He actually attended VMI for a year, and then enlisted directly in the Marine Corps. You can look up his full name. He's one of the most decorated Marines in Marine Corps history. So the Japanese made several attempts to retake Henderson Field, this airfield. Marines fought on with little to no food rations for months. They were reduced to eating bits of rice and roots, any food they could find. 3 major land battles, 5 large naval battles, and daily aerial battles culminated in an Allied victory that was fought for months. The Marines had to battle the dense jungle, insects, scorpions, snakes on the island. By November of 1942, the last Japanese attempt to retake Henderson Field was defended. The Japanese evacuated their remaining forces by February of 43. The Japanese tried to fight to the last man on this island. And again, that's where the Americans got a taste of what it was going to take to fight on the beaches of these tiny specks of sand in the Pacific, where a lot of guys in Europe thought that these guys were having a good time, enjoying the sun and the sand, and the island women in the Pacific, they were dug in foxholes on beaches that on some beaches were made up of sand, some beaches made up of volcanic rock, some beaches made up of just dense swamp, islands made up of dense swamp, trying to fight for, the strategy of island hopping. Casualty reports: Americans, 7,100 killed, 4 captured, 29 ships lost, 615 aircraft lost. With the Japanese, a bit lopsided here, 31,000 dead, just 1,000 captured, 38 ships lost, and somewhere between just under 700 and just under 900 aircraft lost. Any questions there?
I know his first name is Lewis.
Lewis Chesty Fuller. Yeah.
Thank you.
See you later. Have a good weekend.
The man had too much forehead. Please, just look at this.
Here we have Chesty Puller. He has a very famous quote at Guadalcanal. All right, boys, they're to our left, they're to our right, they're in front of us, they're behind us. We got them right where we want them. Really motivational lieutenant colonel, full bird colonel for the 1st Marine Division during World War II. We'll talk more about Chesty Puller as we move forward. And then that is the insignia of the 1st Division of the Marine Corps. And on the red number 1, Guadalcanal. So here we have the Japanese airfield that would be later named Henderson Field. Remember the landings on Guadalcanal, August 7th, 8th, 1942. And this is Lofton Henderson, who was a Marine Corps pilot that died in the Battle of Midway, who the field was named after. Here he is on the top right. Bottom left is the airfield. Bottom right, aircraft landing on Henderson Field. Again, the Japanese struck back at the Marines on Guadalcanal. These are a couple of tough pictures from Guadalcanal. These are U.S. Marines on the beaches of Guadalcanal and the landings on the left and the right. Bottom left, this just shows you how dug in the Japanese were on Guadalcanal. similar to that of the Italian campaign and the North African campaign. Journalists, correspondents, and filmmakers traveled with these Marine Corps divisions to take these islands. It was a seesaw land, air, and sea battle that began with both sides feeding in reinforcements till a final U.S. victory in February of 1943. Here are U.S. Marines at Guadalcanal. And then this is just another map to show you where Guadalcanal was located, proximity to Port Moresby and Australia. You guys have any questions there? All right, let's move on to the Navajo Code Talkers. Philip Johnston, missionary and teacher, proposed the use of the Navajo to the Marine Corps in 1942. The idea was accepted, and like we talked about before, 29 original Navajo recruits were sent for training. As Robin pointed out, a lot of people didn't think that they were going to be up to the challenge, and they were. About 200 Navajo in total were recruited during the war. They attended boot camp in May of 1942. The first group created the Navajo Code at Camp Pendleton in California. Again, their service and valor, the service and valor of these men was exemplary. A code book was developed to teach relevant words and concepts. The Code Talkers memorized all the variations and practiced their rapid use under stressful conditions during the training. I'm sure they talked about that in the book you read, Robin. Non-Navajo speakers had no idea what the Code Talkers' messages meant. The Japanese couldn't break the Navajo code. Very few non-Navajo people could speak the language. There wasn't any written form of the language, and made-up words for terms that didn't exist in their language were connected to military terms. So, for example, a name for different birds in their language meant airplanes. Chief meant general. The word for egg meant bomb. Those are just a few of the examples from that.
The word ants was for the letter A.
Right, so they would use like Morse code as well. Cool. So we have Navajo Code Talkers in action here. And they were a major target for the Japanese in the Pacific.
Did any of the Navajo Code Talkers ever get captured? I would imagine that the Japanese would want to capture them before they get this.
That's a really good question. We need to take a look at that. You want to look that up real quick?
I got you.
Thank you. All right, you guys good to go here? Let's move. We good to keep going, or we want to pump the brakes? Cool. All right, let's move on to Operation Cartwheel, New Guinea and the Solomons, following Guadal. So this campaign begins in the summer of 42 and will end in May of 1944. Cartwheel was a joint operation aimed at neutralizing the major Japanese base at Rabaul. Again, this is in connection with the 1st Marine Division's landing on Guadal. Remember, Rabaul was lost by the British early in 1942. Remember, they lost Singapore, Rabaul, they lost all those, Hong Kong, a number of different colonial landholdings. The operation was directed by the Supreme Allied Commander in the Southwest Pacific area, General Douglas MacArthur, whose forces advanced along the northeast coast of New Guinea and occupied nearby islands. Allied forces from the Pacific Ocean areas, commanded under Admiral Chester Nimitz, advanced through the Solomon Islands toward Bougainville. The Bougainville campaign was carried out by the 3rd Marine Corps Division, the 37th Army Infantry, with nearly 21,000 Japanese killed and only 1,000 Americans killed. this particular campaign, one of the most lopsided American victories in the Pacific. The success of Operation Cartwheel is going to lead to not only maintaining control of the supply chain to Australia, but it really made MacArthur and Nimitz's strategy of island hopping come to fruition. And this is where MacArthur is going to capitalize on taking smaller islands that were not as heavily defended with superior forces. The Allied forces involved were the United States, a lot of Australians, New Zealanders, and the Dutch, and various Pacific Islanders. Capture of the northeast coast of New Guinea and the Central Solomons essentially led to the reduction of the threat at Rabaul and other related bases. How do you think the natives reacted when the Allies landed on these islands and successfully took them?
I feel like there was probably a lot of suicide because they've always been told, if the Americans come, it's going to be real bad.
You're on the right track. Japanese civilians committed mass suicide. But how did native islanders react?
Native Islanders actually helped them and gave them food.
Very good. Native islanders were part of not like an Italian or French style resistance, but they were part of a resistance. And when victory arrived, when there was victory, typically the islanders gave the Allies as much supply and as much aid as possible. So it was sort of like a very bizarre social issue where, or psychological, I mean, really it's like, could you imagine the psychological damage or absolute mind-numbing experience of a Japanese civilian killing themselves or jumping off a cliff rather than gaining your help, but then like a native islander throwing flowers over your neck and giving you food. It was so. There's a really great part in chapter 7 that talks about how the islanders helped the Allies. Yeah.
I found out about the Code Talker question. No Code Talker was ever captured because they were issued bodyguards when they went out, and the bodyguards had specific instruction by the Marines that if a Code Talker was ever captured, shoot him on sight.
Did you hear that?
Well,
No code talker was ever captured because they had assigned bodyguards, and if the code talker got captured, then the bodyguard was ordered to shoot the code talker.
So that way they could do that.
even then, if the code talker ended up being captured, they got their language as sacred, and they would have killed themselves then. Surrender their code and their language.
But it was also considered preferred due to how brutal Japanese police was.
Yes.
But it's interesting because with language, like for example, when you compare the code talkers with the German Enigma machine, the Enigma, that was all mathematics and everything. Mathematics is pretty universal wherever you are in the universe, but with language, it's a lot more cultural and stuff, and Japanese just, so it was a lot smarter than just using math codes on them.
Yeah. We're going to talk about Enigma here pretty soon. I'm going to put that in the, I'm going to put it in the home from lesson. So, well, yeah, we're going to give him credit where credit's due. All right. So here we have the joint operation Cartwheel to take the Solomons, control the Bismarck Sea, Solomon Sea, and clear the supply lines and the shipping lanes on either side of the Solomons. On the right there, the heavily defended Japanese base of Rabaul. And that is a picture of what Rabaul looked like. And this is an anti-aircraft gun. 367 anti-aircraft guns defended Rabaul. So cartwheel in action. The cartwheel plan identified 13 proposed subordinate operations to set a timetable for their launching. Operation Toenails was set up in New Georgia to take that set of islands. Of the 13, you basically have essentially all of the islands surrounding the Solomons and Papua New Guinea. Rabaul is obviously the most important strategic location to take for the Allies. This included invasion forces from both the United States Army and the Marine Corps. Some of the most successful invasions occurred in the Solomons. The campaign stretched into '44. It showed the effectiveness of a strategy that avoided major concentrations of enemy forces. What I'm trying to get at here is it made MacArthur look like a genius for trying to attack more lightly defended islands. It also sets the stage for the Allies to retake the Philippines. This was island hopping or leapfrogging in action. It aimed at severing the Japanese lines of communication, but it also aimed at severing the Japanese lines of supply. On the left, we have carrier that was part of Task Force 58. On the right, U.S. Marines in the island hopping campaign. I think this is a really great place for us to stop today. Is that good with you guys? Technological advancements in the Pacific. Task Force 58, largest floating fortress of carriers at the time located in the Pacific. That is pretty wild to look at now. Can you imagine you're in a Japanese zero, nearly all of your aircraft carriers are gone as a result of Midway, and Coral Sea, and you fly and you see this, you know things are not going to go well. And that's not the only one. There's another task force called 38. Not as large as this one, but pretty massive. I know I got some aeronautical folk out there. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter plane. This is our American aircraft that could keep up with the Japanese Zero. It replaced the F-4F Wildcat. This is a carrier-based plane, and it was built in '42, and by '43, '44, it was being used in the Pacific. Yeah.
Well, the Japanese here, that was a big problem for Americans early in the war.
Yeah.
It was a very well designed plane. It was very agile, but the one fatal flaw with the Zero is it was not very heavily armored. So it's just what the damage an American plane would sustain, Zero couldn't sustain, and that was a major flaw that American pilots used in their plane.
That's good to know. Well, was the armor pretty good on the Douglases and the Wildcats?
I'm not an expert, but from what I know, I think there was some armor, like especially around the plate, the cockpit. So, for example, shrapnel, to protect the top from shrapnel,
Okay.
that type of stuff. Again, take what I said with a grain of salt. I haven't looked specifically into this, but I have read, about the Zero and that.
Cool. So we're going to do a little bit more with the air war a bit later, because I want to take a look at like the progression of the fighter planes and some of the bombers, how that improved over the war. And then we need to look at landing vehicle tracked. This is not the Higgins boat, but it's the idea of what the Higgins boat was. Higgins boat was mass produced in New Orleans. So the LVT, the landing vehicle track, is produced in like 6 or 7 different places. Most of them were produced in St. Louis. This means that you are going to launch the boat out to sea, and then it's going to hit the ground and track its way onto the beach. So the landing craft had machine gunners, the landing craft had soldiers, the landing craft had jeeps, the landing craft had supply. In this production of landing craft, that's going to be a technological advancement that's going to help turn the tide of battle for the Allies in the Pacific. And I didn't, this is not on yours, but I thought this was kind of cool. That's a landing craft unloading the Jeep. Pretty sweet. And obviously the Jeep, tremendously important, one of the most important technological advancements of the war. All right. So, we good? Questions? Awesome. All right. So we will get into Tarawa